The fire was beautiful. That was the first thing I noticed. Tall flames, golden and wild, reaching toward a sky thick with stars. Torches lined the stone circle in perfect rows, casting long shadows across the faces of 500 wolves gathered to witness the sacred rite. 500 wolves. And every single one of them was watching me. I stood at the edge of the claiming circle in the white ceremonial dress my mother had sewn with her own hands. The fabric was soft, pale linen stitched with silver thread along the hem, the kind of dress a girl wore only once in her lifetime. The kind of dress you wore when your alpha chose you. My heart was hammering so hard I was certain the wolves nearest me could hear it. Maybe they could. Maybe that was why they were already looking away. My name is Seraphine Ashvale. I was the Gamma's daughter. Not royalty. Not a warrior. Not anyone remarkable by the standards of the Iron Fang Pack. But I had been marked. 3 weeks ago, in the forest at the edge of our territory, I had crossed paths with our alpha. And the bond had snapped into place between us like a chain made of lightning. I had felt it. He had felt it. The entire forest had gone silent around us, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. But tonight was the ceremony of declaration. The night every wolf in the pack would witness what the moon goddess had chosen. The night he would speak my name in front of all of them. I smoothed the front of my dress with damp palms. He was already at the center of the circle. Alpha Selim Dravith. He stood with his back to me, broad shoulders squared, the black leather of his ceremonial armor catching the firelight like the scales of something ancient and lethal. His dark hair was bound at the nape of his neck with a cord of braided wolf bone. A circlet of hammered iron sat at his brow, the mark of the Alpha's dominion. He was the most powerful wolf in 5 territories. He was the only man I had ever feared. He was the only man I had ever wanted. And in less than 3 minutes, he was going to say my name. I took one slow step forward, crossing the threshold of the stone circle. The drums stopped. Every eye in the crowd found me. I kept my chin up. I kept walking. And then Selim Dravith turned around. His eyes found mine across the firelight. And I watched something move through his expression, something I had no name for, before his jaw tightened and his face became stone. Complete, absolute stone. The High Elder raised his staff. Alpha Selim Dravith, the old wolf's voice boomed across the sacred ground. Under the eyes of the moon goddess and the ancient law of the pack, you have been granted the sacred gift of the fated bond. Do you stand before this pack to claim what has been given? Silence. 1 heartbeat. 2. I stopped breathing. Selim's gaze dropped from my face. He looked at the ground. And then he spoke 4 words that shattered the entire world. I reject the bond. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the crowd erupted. I don't remember falling to my knees. I only remember the cold of the stone against my palms, and the roaring in my ears, and the way the white hem of my dress pulled around me like something already mourning. I remember his boots. Black. Polished. Walking away. I remember the weight of 500 pairs of eyes pressing down on me like a physical thing. I remember my mother's voice somewhere in the crowd, a single broken sound, not quite a word, not quite a cry. I remember thinking, get up. Get up. Get up. And I remember the exact moment I made myself a promise. I will leave this pack before the sun rises. He will never see me kneel again. But that was 3 days ago. And I had no idea, not even a shadow of a guess, that the same wolf who had destroyed me in front of 500 witnesses was already watching me pack my things. Already planning something far worse than rejection. Chapter 1. 3 days. That's how long I had been invisible. Not the pleasant kind of invisible, the kind where no one noticed you because you were beneath notice. That I knew. That I had lived with my entire life as the Gamma's middle daughter, neither warrior nor beauty, neither ambitious nor powerful enough to demand attention. No. This was the other kind of invisible. The kind where everyone saw you and chose to look away. I walked through the pack village with my hood drawn up and my eyes on the ground, carrying a basket of herbs from the healing stores to the elder's longhouse. A task I had done 100 times before without a second thought. Now every step felt like crossing a battlefield. A group of she-wolves near the well fell quiet as I passed. I heard the whisper start before I'd taken 10 steps away from them, a low, cutting sound designed to carry just far enough. The one he rejected. Humiliating. Did you see her face when she fell? I heard she's still here. Why hasn't she left? Why hasn't she left? I tightened my grip on the basket. Because I'm leaving tonight, I thought. I'm just waiting for dark. That was the truth of it. I had spent 3 days making quiet, careful arrangements. A small pack 3 territories east, the Silver Hollow, had a healer in residence who'd trained under my mentor. I had written to her. The letter was already sent, carried by a trusted trader who owed my father a debt. I had packed what I could fit into a single travel satchel. I had said nothing to anyone. My father had tried to speak to me the morning after the ceremony. He'd come to my room while I sat in the windowsill watching the sun rise, still in the white dress because I hadn't been able to make myself take it off yet. He'd stood in the doorway for a long time. "Sarah," he'd said finally. "Don't," I'd told him. He'd left. My mother was worse. She kept bringing me food. Bowls of warm broth. Plates of bread and honey. As if feeding me could fill the hollow space in my chest where the bond had been before it was ripped out. A rejected bond didn't disappear cleanly. That was something no one told young wolves. They told you about the ceremony. They told you about the sacred joy of being claimed. They told you how the mate bond felt, warm and bright and unbreakable as iron. But they didn't tell you what happened when the bond was rejected. They didn't describe the way it curdled. The bond doesn't break. Not completely. It stays, twisted and wrong, like a bone that snapped and healed crooked. I could still feel him at the edge of my senses. A constant, low-grade presence I couldn't shut off, no matter how hard I tried. That was the cruelest part. He had rejected me. But I was still bound to him. I reached the elder's longhouse and pushed through the heavy oak door, grateful for the dim interior and the smell of dried sage and pine resin that hung in the air like memory. Elder Marin was at her workbench. She was 90 years old and built like a woman carved from weather-worn stone. She looked up at me with sharp gray eyes and said nothing about the ceremony. Nothing about the rejection. Nothing about the whispers outside. She simply pointed at the shelf near the eastern window. Third jar from the left. Moonbloom. I need it ground before midday. I exhaled. Yes, Elder. I found the jar, settled at the secondary bench, and began to work. For one blessed hour, I had nothing to think about except the rhythm of the stone pestle against the dried flowers, the quiet scratch of the elder's stylus across her record scroll, and the distant sound of the training yard beyond the village wall. Distant. But not distant enough. I heard his voice even through the walls. Low. Commanding. A single short instruction to the warriors he was training. My hand stuttered on the pestle. The bond in my chest, that wrong, curled thing, tugged once. Hard. Like a fishhook set just below my ribs. I pressed my lips together and kept grinding. Tonight, I told myself. You leave tonight. but Elder Marin set down her stylus. "He's been watching your family's cottage," she said. Very quietly. Very carefully. I looked up. Her gray eyes were calm. Steady as the stone walls around us. "The Alpha," she clarified, as if I needed the clarification. "He's had Draven stationed outside your father's property since yesterday evening." I stared at her. "Why?" She picked up her stylus again. "That," she said, "is an excellent question." Chapter 2. Draven. Of all the wolves he could have sent to watch me, it had to be Draven. Jace Draven was the Alpha's second, his closest soldier, his enforcer, the wolf who carried out orders that no one else was permitted to question. He had a face like a closed fist and eyes the color of old pewter. He'd once broken a wolf's arm for speaking disrespectfully about the Alpha's bloodline at a feast. I had known him since childhood. He had never once spoken to me directly. If Draven was stationed outside my family's cottage, it wasn't coincidence. It wasn't routine. It was a leash I hadn't agreed to wear. I left the Elder's longhouse when the midday bell rang, walking a different route back to the cottage, longer, through the back paths between the storage buildings, where foot traffic was thin and I could think without eyes on me. The question kept circling. Why? Why post a guard after a rejection? Why watch me at all? If Selim Dravith had wanted nothing to do with me, had stood in the sacred circle in front of the entire pack and severed the bond in the most public, devastating way possible, why would he care whether I stayed or went? Unless he knew I was planning to leave. I stopped walking. My pulse spiked. Could he feel it? Could he sense my intentions through the broken bond the same way I could still feel him at the edges of my senses? I forced myself to start moving again. It didn't matter. Even if he could sense something, intent, emotion, direction, that gave him no right to hold me here. The rejection had been public. The pack had witnessed it. Under pack law, a rejected mate was free to seek another pack, another life, another bond. I had done nothing wrong. I had nothing to fear. I came around the corner of the grain store and stopped dead. Draven was leaning against the wall of the adjacent building, arms folded, watching the path ahead of me with the bored patience of a predator who knew its prey was already contained. His pewter eyes slid to mine. He said nothing. I lifted my chin and walked forward. He didn't move. Didn't block me. Just watched. I passed within 6 feet of him. "Seraphine," he said. One word. My name. The way you'd say stop to a horse. I paused. Draven. I kept my voice level. "Is there something you need? The Alpha would like you to remain within the village boundaries until further notice." The words were very polite. The meaning was not. I turned slowly to face him. "The Alpha rejected the mate bond 3 days ago," I said. "In front of the entire pack. I am no longer bound by his." "You are a member of this pack," Draven said evenly. "Pack members require Alpha approval to leave the territory." It was technically true. It was also a rule that had never been enforced against a single wolf in living memory. Wolves left the pack for trading runs, for visiting kin, for healing expeditions. The approval requirement was a formality, a courtesy. He was using a formality to build a cage. "Understood," I said. Very quietly. Very carefully. And I started planning how to leave without using the main gate. That night, I waited until the fire in the main hall had burned to embers. My satchel was packed beneath my sleeping pallet. I'd dressed in dark wool and soft-soled boots, nothing ceremonial, nothing white, nothing that would catch the moonlight. My window faced the eastern wall. The eastern wall had a section near the old mill where the stones were uneven, climbable, if you knew where to put your hands and feet. I'd climbed it twice as a child on dares. I could do it again. I opened my door. Draven was standing in my corridor. Not outside the cottage. Inside. In my hallway, between me and the front door, with his arms at his sides and his face arranged in that same blank professional patience. "The Alpha would like to speak with you," he said. I stared at him. "Now?" "Yes." "It's the middle of the night." "Yes." My fingers tightened on the strap of my satchel. I had it over one shoulder, barely concealed beneath my cloak. If Draven noticed, he gave no sign. "And if I say no?" I asked. Something moved in his pewter eyes. Not cruelty. Something closer to pity. "I'd advise against it," he said. Chapter 3. The Alpha's Hall was the oldest structure in the Pack's holdings. It had been built 3 centuries ago by the founding bloodline, Selim's ancestors, from black granite cut from the mountain at the northern border. The walls were 4 feet thick. The ceilings were arched and high, carved with scenes of ancient hunts and battles that seemed to move in torchlight. It smelled like iron. And pine. And something specific, something I couldn't think about directly without the broken bond in my chest lurching sideways. Draven led me through the great oak doors and left me standing in the center of the hall. Alone. For almost 10 minutes. I used the time to study my exits. 2 doors, main entrance behind me, secondary passage to the left near the weapons wall. Both guarded. A high window above the dais that admitted moonlight but nothing else. I was cataloging the chains on the weapons rack when I heard him. Not footsteps. A shift in the air. A drop in temperature, subtle and significant, the way a storm changed the feel of the sky before the first lightning. And then his scent reached me, deep forest, rain-wet stone, and something darker underneath, something that had no name in any language I knew but that my wolf recognized down to the marrow. I turned around. Selim Dravith stood at the far end of the hall. He had changed from his day armor. He wore dark leather trousers and a loose linen shirt, the neck unlaced, sleeves pushed to the elbows. His circlet was gone. His dark hair was loose. He looked less like an alpha. He looked like a man. That was somehow worse. He walked toward me, and I held my ground with every ounce of control I possessed, because every cell in my body wanted to either run toward him or run away, and I refused to do either. He stopped 6 feet from me. The same distance I'd kept from Draven. I'd done it unconsciously, I realized. 6 feet. Far enough to react. Close enough that running was still possible. He looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were silver, not the soft silver of moonlight but the hard silver of a blade's edge. They moved across my face the way a wolf read a trail, deliberately, reading for things that weren't obvious. "You were going to leave," he said. Not a question. "Yes," I said. He nodded once. As if I'd confirmed something he already knew. "Sit down, Seraphine." "I'd rather stand." Something shifted in his expression. A flicker of something that might have been surprise. "Sit down." Alpha command. The words carried weight, the specific frequency of an alpha's dominance that pressed against the wolf inside me, urging submission. I felt it. I also gripped the strap of my satchel and did not move. His eyes narrowed. "You're resisting a command," he said. "You rejected the bond," I said. 3 days ago. In front of everyone. You made yourself very clear. That means you have no claim on my obedience beyond standard pack law. And standard pack law says? I know what pack law says. Then you know you have no grounds to keep me here. He was quiet. For a long moment, he was completely quiet. He looked at me with those blade-edge eyes, and something moved through his expression that I couldn't read, couldn't interpret, and it frightened me more than anger would have. There are things you don't understand, he said finally. Then explain them. He said nothing. I took a breath. Alpha Dravith. I have done nothing to harm this pack. I have made no threats, broken no laws, defied no sacred rights, other than the one where I apparently had the audacity to be your fated mate without your permission. My voice stayed level. I was proud of that. I am asking, formally, for safe passage out of this territory. He looked at me. No, he said. One word. Absolute as the stone walls around us. I stared at him. You can't. You will be moved to the east wing of the hall tonight. He turned, as if the conversation was over. Your needs will be attended to. You will not be harmed. I will not be. I took a step forward. You can't imprison me. I have rights under pack law. I am the law. He said it without looking at me. Without heat or cruelty. Just fact. Pack law serves the Alpha's judgment. My judgment is that you remain. He walked toward the secondary passage. Draven will show you to your room. Selim. He stopped. I don't know why I used his given name. I hadn't planned to. It came out before I could stop it, and I watched his shoulders lock into absolute stillness, and for a moment, one single suspended moment, the broken bond in my chest did something strange. It went quiet. Not cold. Not wrong. Quiet. Like the held breath before a storm. He didn't turn around. Why? I asked. My voice came out smaller than I intended. Why reject me and then refuse to let me go? What am I to you? What do you actually want from me? A long silence. So long I thought he wasn't going to answer. And then, very quietly, in a voice I hadn't heard from him before, not commanding, not cold, not alpha. I don't know. He walked through the passage. And left me standing in the middle of his ancient stone hall, more confused and more afraid than I had been at any point in the 3 worst days of my life. Chapter 4, The Gilded Cage. The east wing smelled like him. That was the first thing I noticed when Draven opened the heavy oak door and stepped aside. Not overwhelmingly, not the way his presence in the hall had been, but underneath everything else, beneath the beeswax of the candles and the cedar of the furniture and the cold mineral smell of the stone walls, there was that thread of deep forest and rain-wet granite. Like he had been here recently. Like he came here often. I stepped inside and said nothing. The room was large. Larger than my family's entire cottage. A wide sleeping pallet on a raised frame, dressed in furs and dark wool blankets. A writing desk near the window. A carved wardrobe standing against the eastern wall. A fireplace already lit, throwing amber warmth across the stone floor. It was not a cell. That was perhaps the most unsettling thing about it. A cell I could have categorized. A cell had bars and cold and the obvious grammar of punishment. This room had cushioned chairs and a copper basin filled with warm water and a tray of food near the hearth, bread, soft cheese, a bowl of something steaming. It looked like a room prepared for a guest. Or a mate. I did not touch the food. The door? I asked. Will be locked, Draven said. From the outside. The window? Second story. The drop is 20 feet onto flagstone. I turned to face him. You've thought of everything. The alpha is thorough, he said. No apology in it. No discomfort. Just fact, the same way everything Draven said was just fact. I looked at him for a moment. Draven was not a cruel man, I had always understood that, even as a child watching him from a distance. He was a soldier. He followed orders the way a river followed its banks, completely, without question, because that was simply its nature. Does it bother you? I asked. Following an order like this? His pewter eyes were steady. My feelings about the order are irrelevant, he said. That's not what I asked. A pause. Almost imperceptible. Get some sleep, Seraphine, he said. He stepped back and pulled the door shut. The lock turned. I stood in the middle of the room and listened to his footsteps retreat down the corridor until there was nothing left but the pop and hiss of the fire. Then I sat down on the edge of the pallet. And I let myself feel it, all of it, the humiliation and the fury and the bewilderment and the grief, let it move through me like a wave, crested and broke and receded. I would not cry again. I had cried the first night. Alone in my room at my father's cottage with my face pressed into my pillow so no one would hear. I had cried until I was empty. I had made myself a promise after that. No more. Crying was for wolves who had given up. I was not giving up. I got up and walked the perimeter of the room. The fireplace, solid stone backing, no access. The wardrobe, solid against the wall, no hidden passage. The window, Draven had not lied about the drop. 20 feet, onto flat flagstone. Even for a wolf, the landing would be brutal and loud. The door, I pressed my ear against it and listened. 2 sets of breathing in the corridor. Not just one guard. 2. I stepped back from the door. Sat back down on the pallet. Thought. He had said, I don't know. That was the piece I kept returning to. Of all the answers he could have given, you belong to this pack, I need to protect the bond, you're a security risk, he had given me the most honest one. I don't know. An alpha who controlled 500 wolves with absolute authority, who commanded warriors and governed territory and enforced pack law with iron certainty. That alpha had looked at me across a stone hall in the middle of the night and admitted he didn't know what he wanted. That was not the answer of a man who had rejected me cleanly. That was the answer of a man who was lying to himself about something enormous. I lay back on the pallet and stared at the carved ceiling. Why reject me? The bond had been real. I had felt it, we had both felt it. You could not fake the fated bond. The moon goddess did not make errors. The ancient text said the bond chose the most suited pair, the wolves who would make each other stronger, more complete. So why would he reject it? What was he afraid of? What was he hiding? I turned onto my side and watched the fire burn. I did not sleep for a long time. But when I finally did, I dreamed of silver eyes and rain-wet stone, and a voice saying my name in the dark, not as a command, not as a dismissal, but like something precious and terrifying that had no other word. Chapter 5, What the Pack Doesn't Know. Morning came through the high window like a confession, pale and reluctant. I was already awake. I had been awake for an hour, sitting at the writing desk, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to the cold blue of early dawn. Thinking. Sorting through everything I knew, everything I had observed, looking for the shape of something I was missing. The food tray had been replaced sometime in the night. Fresh bread. A small pot of honey. Sliced fruit, early plums, dark-skinned and fragrant. I ate, because I was not stupid enough to let pride starve me into weakness. Then the door opened. Not Draven this time. A young she-wolf I recognized, Petra, one of the hall servants, slipped inside with a folded garment over her arm and the expression of someone trying very hard not to make eye contact. Good morning, I said. She startled slightly, as though she hadn't expected me to speak first. Good morning, miss. The Alpha, she swallowed. The Alpha sends fresh clothing. And asks that you join him in the war room at mid-morning. I looked at the folded garment. Dark wool, well made. Not the white ceremonial linen of the rejection, thank the goddess. Does the Alpha usually ask? I said. Or is this another politely worded command? Petra's eyes darted to the floor. I'm only the messenger, miss. I took the clothing. Tell him I'll be there, I said. And tell him nothing about this meeting is a concession. She fled. I dressed, braided my hair into something practical and severe, and spent the remaining time before mid-morning examining the war room's likely exits from memory. I had been inside it once, 2 years ago, delivering a scroll to my father during a border dispute meeting. 2 doors. No windows on the ground level. Map tables bolted to the floor. Not promising. But the war room meant conversation. Conversation meant information. And information was the only weapon I currently possessed. The war room was lit by 6 hanging lanterns and smelled of old parchment and tallow wax. Selim was already there. He stood at the central map table with 2 of his senior wolves, a broad, scarred warrior named Barak and a gray-haired strategist called Elder Finn, who technically held a council position but functioned primarily as the Alpha's advisor. They looked up when I entered. Barak's face arranged itself into careful blankness. Elder Finn watched me with something sharper, something evaluating. Selim looked at me for a moment, then looked back at the map. Leave us, he said to the other 2. Barak moved without hesitation. Elder Finn paused. His eyes moved from me to Selim and back again, and something passed across his expression, something I wanted to read more closely but didn't have time to catch before he, too, left, pulling the door shut behind him. Silence. Selim stood on the far side of the map table. I stood near the door. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Sit, he said. I'll stand, I said. He looked up. Those silver eyes settled on my face. This time he didn't repeat the command. I want to explain, he said. I'm listening. He was quiet for a moment, and I watched him gather something, not words, but the nerve to use them. It was strange to watch. The Alpha of the Iron Fang did not appear to be a man who lacked nerve in any other context. The rejection was not what you think it was, he said finally. My heartbeat stumbled. I kept my face still. What was it, then? I asked. He placed both hands flat on the map table and looked down at the parchment spread across it, the territory map, the pack boundaries, the markers indicating the 5 surrounding territories. There is a threat, he said. To this pack. To the bloodline. I waited. 3 months ago, I received intelligence from our scouts in the northern range. A coalition is forming. 3 packs, the Blood Hollow, the Grey Spine, and a faction I have not yet been able to name, are moving toward alliance. He traced a line on the map with one finger. Their intent is the Iron Fang's territory. That's not unusual, I said carefully. Border disputes. This is not a border dispute. His voice was flat. Final. They intend to challenge for the seat. Full dominance. If the challenge succeeds, every wolf in this pack is subject to the laws of a new alpha. He finally looked up at me. Every wolf. Including the alpha's fated mate. I went very still. An alpha's mate is a target, he said. In a dominance challenge, she is leverage. She is vulnerability. If the opposing coalition knew, if they had confirmation of who the fated bond had chosen, he stopped. His jaw tightened. You would be in danger before the challenge even began. The rejection was meant to remove that target from you. The room was very quiet. The lanterns swayed almost imperceptibly overhead. I stared at him. You rejected me, I said slowly. Publicly. Brutally. In front of the whole pack. To protect me. His expression didn't soften. Yes. Without telling me. Telling you would have. Without asking me, I continued. Without giving me the choice. Without considering that I might have wanted to make that decision for myself. He straightened. It wasn't a decision that could be shared. Because you decided that. Because I am the alpha. Because you decided that, I said again. Louder this time. The air in the room changed. He looked at me with those blade-edge eyes, and for a moment I thought he was going to invoke Alpha Command again, press his dominance down on the room like a physical weight. He didn't. Yes, he said. Quieter now. Because I decided that. I breathed. In through my nose, out through my mouth, slow and deliberate, because if I did not control my breathing I was going to do something irreversible with the fury and the grief and the confused, terrible tenderness that were all fighting for space in my chest at once. So you humiliated me, I said. To protect me. Yes. And now you've imprisoned me. I looked around the room. To protect me. He was quiet. Selim. The name came easier this time, or maybe I was simply past the point of caution. You are doing everything to me. Nothing with me. You are making every decision about my life without asking whether I want the life you're deciding for me. Something moved in his face. Real this time. Not the stone mask of the alpha. Something underneath it. If I had asked, he said, very quietly. What would you have said? The question landed in the center of my chest. I opened my mouth. And then I stopped. Because the true, honest answer, the one I had been trying not to think about since the moment the bond had first snapped into place in that forest clearing, was complicated and frightening and far too vulnerable to say out loud in a war room with 2 guards outside the door. I looked at him. He looked at me. And the broken bond between us did that thing again, that moment of terrible, suspended quiet, like the world holding its breath. That's not the point, I said finally. But we both heard what I didn't say. Chapter 6, The Enemy Already Inside. He let me walk the inner courtyard that afternoon. Not alone, Draven was a shadow 10 paces behind me at all times, close enough to prevent any meaningful escape attempt, far enough to maintain the polite fiction that I was taking a voluntary stroll. But it was outside. Fresh air. The smell of turned earth and pine from the forest beyond the walls. The cold edge of the wind carrying something that might have become rain before nightfall. I breathed it in and felt marginally more human. I was halfway around the second circuit of the courtyard when I became aware of being watched. Not Draven, I was accustomed to his observation, had already filed it into a category of persistent inconveniences I was choosing not to expend energy on. This was different. This was a gaze with intention behind it. I turned my head slowly. She was standing at the far end of the courtyard near the entrance to the training wing. Tall. Striking. Dark hair unbound and falling past her shoulders, wearing the leather and fur of a high-ranking warrior she-wolf. Isolde Kren. I knew her name the way everyone in the pack knew her name. She was the beta's daughter, the finest fighter in the female ranks, and she had been, by common assumption, by years of careful social architecture, by her own evident expectation, the most probable mate for the alpha. Before the fated bond had chosen me instead. Our eyes met across the courtyard. Her expression was unreadable. But her amber eyes were bright and her jaw was set with the specific tension of a person working very hard at composure. I turned back and kept walking. Sarah. The voice came from behind me, not Draven's. I stopped. Soft footsteps on the flagstones. The warrior she-wolf came alongside me, matching my pace, tilting her head forward so her hair shielded her face from Draven's sightline. I heard you were moved to the East Wing, she said. Her voice was low. Neutral. News travels quickly, I said. In the Alpha's hall it travels at the speed of fire. A pause. How long does he intend to keep you? He hasn't shared that information with me. She was quiet for a moment. We walked in silence, side by side, which was perhaps the strangest thing that had happened to me in 3 very strange days. Isolde Kren had never spoken to me before. Not once in 20 years of sharing the same pack. I am not your enemy, she said finally. I didn't say you were. You thought it. I glanced sideways at her. She was looking straight ahead. I thought it, I admitted. Something shifted in her expression, not a smile exactly, but something less armored. The rejection didn't surprise me, she said quietly. For what it's worth. I knew, I had guessed, something was wrong before the ceremony. He had been different for weeks. She paused. Ever since the scouts returned from the northern range. My step faltered almost imperceptibly. Different how? I asked. Harder, she said. More closed. He had always been private. But this was different. This was a man carrying something he couldn't put down. She glanced back at Draven, measured his distance. There is something else, she said. Something I think you should know. Her voice had changed. Quieter. More careful. The intelligence he received from the Northern Scouts, it didn't come only from outside the pack. She paused. One of the pieces of information in that report concerned someone inside the Iron Fang. I stopped walking. She stopped with me. There is a traitor, she said. Barely above a whisper. Someone in this pack has been feeding information to the coalition. Territory movements. Patrol schedules. Guard rotations. She looked at me directly, amber eyes level and serious. And 3 days before the ceremony of declaration, they sent word to the coalition leadership about the fated bond. The air went out of my lungs. They told the coalition about me, I said. About you, yes. And about how a fated bond would affect the Alpha. How it would divide his attention. Create vulnerability. She held my gaze. The rejection was partly to protect you from external threat. But Sarah. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. It was also because he didn't know how much the traitor already knew. He didn't know who inside the pack was passing information. And until he did, she glanced once more at Draven. Anyone close to him is a potential target for the traitor's interest. I stared at her. He doesn't just have enemies outside the walls, I said slowly. No, she said. He has enemies inside them. Yes. And he still hasn't found them. She looked at me steadily. That, she said, is why you're in the East Wing. And why he won't let you leave. She stepped back from me, restoring distance and the casual appearance of strangers crossing paths in a courtyard. Why are you telling me this? I asked. She was already turning away. Because you deserve to understand the cage you're in, she said. Quietly. Without looking back. Even if the man who built it thought he was protecting you. She walked back toward the training wing. I stood in the middle of the courtyard. Draven waited, 10 paces behind me, silent and patient. The wind moved through the courtyard and carried with it something cold, the promise of rain, yes, but underneath that something else. Danger. Closer than the northern mountains. Closer than the coalition's massing armies. Inside the walls. Watching us both. The cage has a reason now, but that doesn't make it a home. Seraphine knows the truth of the rejection. But the traitor is still hidden. The coalition is still moving. And Selim is still a man who makes decisions about her life without asking. Chapter 7, The Wolf Who Hunts. I did not sleep that night either. But this time, I was not lying still. I sat at the writing desk with a candle burned low beside me, and I thought with the careful, methodical precision my father had spent years trying to teach me, the Gamma's discipline, the habit of mind that sorted information into columns and looked for patterns in the gaps. Here is what I knew. A coalition of 3 packs was moving against the Iron Fang. Someone inside the pack was feeding them information. That traitor had known about the fated bond before the ceremony. Which meant the traitor had access to information that was not widely known, because the bond itself had not been announced. Selim had told no one. I had told no one but my mother. My mother. I pressed my fingers to my temples. No. My mother had not left our cottage grounds in 2 weeks. She had no connection to the Northern Territories, no reason, no motive. I set her aside. Who else had known? Elder Marin. She had seen me the morning after I had first encountered the bond. I had come to her with the disorientation and the physical symptoms that a new bond produced. The heightened senses and the strange pull toward the north quadrant of the territory where Selim's hall stood. She had known what it meant before I said a word. But Marin was 90 years old and had served this pack since before Selim's father was born. I set her aside too. Who else? Draven. Draven would have known. And Alpha told his second everything, or nearly everything. The bond would not have been a secret from the Alpha's closest wolf. I thought about Draven's face when he'd said I'd advise against it. The fraction of something in his eyes that might have been pity. Draven was fiercely loyal. I believed that down to my bones. But Draven was not the only wolf the Alpha trusted with sensitive information. I picked up the quill from the desk. I had no scroll, so I wrote in the margin of a supply manifest that had been left in the room, small, careful letters in the empty white space at the edge of the parchment. Who knew about the bond before the ceremony? I wrote what I had. Then I wrote the question underneath it that I had been circling without landing on directly. Who benefits from weakening the Alpha before a dominance challenge? The obvious answer was the coalition. But they were outside the walls. Their agent inside the walls, the traitor, needed a reason beyond simple alliance. Feeding information to an enemy pack was not a minor transgression. It was treason. The punishment under pack law was death. No wolf took that risk for ideology. There had to be something personal. Something they wanted that the current order denied them. Power. Safety. Revenge. Or. I set the quill down. Or they had been promised something by the coalition. Something significant enough to justify the risk. If the Iron Fang falls in a dominance challenge, who rises? The new Alpha's allies. His enforcers. His inner circle. The wolves who had helped deliver the prize. I looked at what I had written. Then I blew out the candle and sat in the dark for a while. Thinking. By the time the first gray light came through the window, I had the beginning of something. Not a name. Not yet. But a shape. Petra came with breakfast at dawn. This time, I was ready for her. Petra, I said, before she could retreat to the door. Sit down. She looked alarmed. Miss, I'm not supposed to. I'm not going to ask you to do anything dangerous, I said. I only want to talk. She hesitated. Then, with the expression of someone making a choice they knew they'd be thinking about later, she perched on the edge of the chair near the hearth. I sat across from her. How long have you worked in the hall? I asked. 3 years, miss. So you were here when the Alpha's father died? When Selim took the seat? Yes. And the wolves who served under the old Alpha, did they all stay? She was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking about how much of this was safe to say. Most stayed, she said carefully. Some left. There were some who felt the transition was abrupt. Abrupt, I repeated. The old Alpha had named an heir from outside the bloodline, Petra said. Before he died. A wolf from the eastern branch of the Kren family. She paused. But then Selim came of age and the blood claim superseded the named heir. I went very still. The Kren family. The Krens, I said evenly. As in Beta Kren? Isolde's family? Yes, miss. Petra looked at the floor. The Beta, Isolde's father, was the named heir. He would have been Alpha. She hesitated. He stepped aside when Selim presented his blood claim. Publicly. Graciously. There was no formal conflict. But, I said. She looked up. But there are wolves who remember, she said quietly. Who think the seat should have gone differently. She stood, smoothing her apron. That's all I know, miss. I really should. Of course, I said. Thank you, Petra. She left. I sat with the information and turned it carefully in my hands like a stone with a sharp edge. Beta Kren. Isolde's father. The man who should have been Alpha, who had stepped aside, who had been gracious in public. And who had, just yesterday, sent his daughter to walk beside me in the courtyard. To tell me exactly enough to make me feel informed. Exactly enough to redirect my thinking toward an invisible traitor. While placing herself at the center of my trust. I stood up. Isolde Kren had not told me those things out of generosity. She had told me those things to shape what I believed. The question was why. And the question underneath that was, did she know that her father might be the wolf I was looking for? Or was she protecting him? I needed to speak to Selim. That was the conclusion I arrived at before mid-morning, and it sat in my chest with all the comfortable ease of a stone. Because speaking to Selim required asking Draven, and asking Draven meant admitting I had something to say worth saying, which meant Selim would know I had spent the night not sleeping but thinking, which meant he would ask what I had been thinking about. And I did not yet have enough certainty to accuse a Beta of treason. Not without more. I needed one more piece. I went to the door. Draven, I said through the wood. A pause. Yes. I need access to the pack records room. A longer pause. What for? Research, I said. The silence stretched long enough that I thought he was going to refuse. Then, I'll ask the Alpha. 20 minutes later, I was in the records room. With Draven standing at the door, arms folded. And Selim standing at my shoulder. He had not planned to come himself, I suspected. He had planned to grant permission and let Draven supervise. But something had changed his mind. He stood closer than was strictly necessary in a room this size, and said nothing while I moved through the shelves of scrolls and bound records with methodical efficiency. I was looking for correspondence logs. Every pack kept them. Incoming and outgoing communications, recorded by the hall scribe, filed by month. It was administrative record keeping, as dry and unglamorous as inventory management. But it showed who spoke to whom. And when. I found the right section, pulled the most recent bound volume, and opened it on the reading table. Selim was looking at the page over my shoulder. "What are you looking for?" he said. "Information traffic," I said. "The period between the scout's return and the ceremony." I ran my finger down the entries. 3 months of outgoing correspondence. "I can have my scribes." "I'd rather look myself," I said. He was quiet. He didn't argue. I felt him looking at the side of my face more than he looked at the records, and I kept my own gaze firmly on the pages, because the alternative was looking back, and I was not ready for whatever happened when I looked back. The records were detailed. Routine entries, trade correspondence, territory boundary confirmations, inter-pack formality letters, supply orders. And then, 8 weeks ago, something different. An outgoing letter to a merchant house in the northern range. Ordinary on its face. Except the merchant house's location marker put it squarely within the territory claimed by the Blood Hollow Pack. I pointed at the entry without touching it. "This," I said. Selim leaned in. His shoulder pressed against mine. He didn't move away. Neither did I. "That correspondent was cleared by my father's trade council 6 years ago," he said. "Is the trade council still active?" A pause. "Partially. Several members retired when I took the seat." "Who authorized the correspondence 8 weeks ago?" Another pause. Longer. "That would require a council seal," he said slowly. "Which council members are still active?" I asked. I felt the exact moment he understood what I was building toward. The shift in his posture was subtle, a slight straightening, a new quality of stillness, but I felt it because I was standing close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough that the broken bond in my chest had been quietly, persistently tugging toward him for the last 10 minutes. He reached past me and turned 2 pages forward in the records book. His arm brushed mine. Neither of us acknowledged it. 2 active council members, he said. His voice was careful. Controlled. Elder Finn. He paused. And Beta Kren. I looked at the page. He looked at the page. The silence in the records room was the kind that had weight to it, the specific gravity of a realization settling into place. "Seraphine," he said. Very quietly. "I know," I said. It's not enough to." "I know. It's not enough yet." I turned to face him. We were very close. Close enough that I could see the exact texture of the scar that crossed his jaw, an old one, from before I could remember. Close enough that his scent was not just a thread anymore but a presence, surrounding and specific, and the bond in my chest had gone from a tug to something steadier. Something that felt, God help me, like warmth. "There's more," I said. "I think there's more. And I think I know how to find it." He looked at me. Those silver eyes moving across my face the same way they had in the hall on the first night, reading, searching. "You were looking for this," he said. "Last night. Instead of sleeping." "Yes." "Why?" It was a genuine question. Not a challenge, not the alpha demanding to understand his prisoner's motives. A person asking another person why they had spent a sleepless night doing something difficult when they owed him nothing. I held his gaze. "Because there is a traitor in this pack," I said. "And until you find them, you are not safe." "And until you are safe," I stopped. Pressed my lips together. "I'm not leaving a pack with an open wound in it. Even this one." Something moved in his expression. Deep and complicated, something I hadn't seen there before. "Even this one," he repeated softly. "Don't make it sentimental," I said. "I'm practical." But the corner of his mouth, just barely, just for a single second, moved. Not quite a smile. But close enough that my heart did something I was going to firmly refuse to analyze. Chapter 8, Fire and Confession. The rain arrived that evening. It came hard and fast, the way storms did in the mountain territory, without warning, without apology, sheets of cold water driving against the stone walls of the hall and turning the courtyard below into a shallow, churning river. I stood at my window and watched it come. Selim had given me access to the records room for the rest of the day. He had also, notably, not returned me to the locked East Wing room afterward. I was still in the East Wing. But the door was unlocked. I had tested it at dusk, pressed the handle, felt it give, stood in the open doorway for a moment. No one came running. No Draven appearing at the end of the corridor. I had closed the door again, sat down, and tried to decide what that meant. An unlocked door was not freedom. I was still in the hall, still within pack boundaries, still watched, just less visibly. But it was something. It was a shift in the calculation. I was thinking about that shift when the knock came. Not Draven's efficient 3-rap pattern. 2 knocks. Slower. More deliberate. I knew before I opened the door. He stood in the corridor in a gray wool shirt and dark trousers, no armor, no circlet, the same stripped-down version of himself I had seen in the hall on the first night. His hair was slightly damp at the temples from the rain, as though he had been outside recently. He was holding a clay jug. I stared at it. "It's warm spiced cider," he said. "The kitchen's made it against the cold." "You brought me cider," I said. "Yes." I looked at him for a moment. Then I stepped back from the door. He came in. He set the jug on the small table near the fireplace and found 2 cups on the shelf above it with the straightforward efficiency of someone who knew where everything in this room was kept. Which, I supposed, he did. It was his hall. He poured. I sat in the chair near the hearth and accepted the cup he held toward me, and for a peculiar moment we were simply 2 people sitting near a fire while rain hammered at the walls, and nothing in the room felt like imprisonment or obligation or the wreckage of a public rejection. It felt quiet. Dangerously quiet. "What I did to you at the ceremony," he said. He said it without preamble, without softening, looking into his cup. "I understand the reason now," I said. "Understanding the reason doesn't make it," he stopped. Started again. "I humiliated you. In front of your family. In front of every wolf in this pack." He looked up. "That is not something I can explain away with strategy." I was quiet. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." He looked back at the fire. "I have been alpha for 6 years," he said. "In 6 years, I have made decisions that were hard. Decisions that caused pain. I accepted that as the cost of the seat." A pause. "But what I did to you? Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Before the ceremony. You could have come to me. Explained the threat. Asked me to play along. Because the traitor was already watching," he said. "If I had contacted you before the ceremony, if there had been any private meeting between us, and the traitor had known, it would have confirmed the bond to the coalition." Yes. The rejection had to be real. His jaw tightened. It had to be complete. Convincing. There could be no hesitation, no. "No mercy," I said. He flinched. The alpha of the Iron Fang flinched at that word. I had not expected that. "No mercy," he said quietly. "No. There couldn't be." The fire snapped. Rain drove against the window. "When I saw you fall," he said. He stopped. Tried again. When I saw you fall to your knees. His voice was different now. Lower. Something raw beneath it. I wanted to. He stopped again. Set his cup down. Pressed his hand flat against his knee. The bond, he said. It doesn't feel broken to you. Does it? It was barely a question. No, I said. Very quietly. It feels wrong. Crooked. But not broken. Because it isn't. He turned to look at me fully. A faded bond cannot be broken by a public declaration. I knew that when I made it. I knew the rejection would hurt you. I knew it would not sever what the goddess had set. He held my gaze. It was a performance. For the pack. For the traitor. For the coalition's intelligence. But not real, I said. No, he said. Not real. The air between us was very still despite the storm outside. The bond in my chest, that thing I had been calling broken, crooked, wrong, shifted. Like something settling back into alignment. Like a bone that had been set at last. Selim, I said. Yes. If you'd had a choice, if there had been no threat, no coalition, no traitor. He looked at me. And I watched him decide to be honest. The decision moved across his face like weather, a visible internal shift from armor to something underneath it. I would have said your name, he said. In that circle. In front of everyone. A pause. I would have said it and meant every word of what comes after. The fire crackled between us. My heart was doing something complicated and significant. That's a remarkable thing to say, I managed, to a woman you've been holding captive. A breath escaped him. Not quite a laugh. But close. And then, because everything in this room had become too quiet and too warm and too genuinely dangerous to my ability to think clearly, I cleared my throat and looked back at the fire. The traitor, I said. Yes, he said. Returning to it. The mask coming back, but lighter now. Worn differently. I want to help you find them. He was quiet. You're not a soldier, he said. No. I'm a Gamma's daughter who spent last night reading correspondence logs. I glanced at him. Give me 2 days in the records room. And access to the council's sealed correspondence. That's classified material. I know. I can't give he stopped himself. I raised an eyebrow. You were going to say prisoner, I said. He said nothing. I am not your prisoner, I said. Not angry. Just clear. I am your mate. Whether you've said so publicly or not, that is what I am. And that means this pack's survival is my concern too. He looked at me for a long, unreadable moment. Then he reached into his shirt and withdrew a flat iron key on a cord. He held it out. Records room, he said. And the council archive. The East Archive, not the lower vault. He paused. The lower vault is something else. I took the key. Our fingers touched. Neither of us pulled away immediately. 2 days, he said. 2 days, I agreed. He stood. Moved toward the door. Stopped. Seraphine. Yes. He did not turn around. His voice was low, directed at the door. Don't trust this old Kren, he said. My pulse spiked. Why? A pause. Because she is her father's daughter, he said. And she is very good at deciding what you should know. He left. I sat with the key in my hand and the warmth of his fingers fading from mine, and I stared at the fire for a long time. Thinking about everything he had said. And everything he hadn't. Chapter 9, The Lower Vault. I told myself I would not go to the lower vault. For almost an entire day, I kept that promise. I worked through the council archive in the East Records room with focused efficiency, 8 hours of correspondence cross-referencing, margin notes accumulating on spare parchment, a growing map of communication patterns that was beginning to tell a very specific story. Beta Kren's correspondence trail was careful. Too careful. In the way that a deliberately cleared path through the woods was more suspicious than an untouched one. There were gaps, weeks where a man of his administrative function should have generated significant paper trail, and didn't. The gaps corresponded almost perfectly with the timeline Selim had given me. Scouts return from the north. Gap begins. Bond forms in the forest clearing. Gap widens. Coalition intelligence received by the Alpha. Gap reaches its peak. Ceremony of declaration. Gap ends. Whatever Kren had been doing during those weeks, he had made sure it left no record in the council archive. Which meant the record was somewhere else. Or it had been destroyed. Or it was in the lower vault. I sat back from the reading table and looked at the ceiling. The lower vault. Something else, Selim had said. With a specific weight on those words that was not quite a warning and not quite an invitation. I looked at the iron key in my hand. East Archive, he had said. But he had given me a key that opened the East Archive's main lock. The same lock I had noticed when I arrived that first morning and examined the door out of sheer habit that was used throughout the hall's older sections. A master key. Had he known that when he handed it to me? I was going to make a decision I might regret. I always thought that clearly before making them. It had never stopped me yet. The lower vault was beneath the hall. I found the entrance behind the weapons wall in the war room, a flagstone that moved when you pressed the third iron bracket from the left, revealing a staircase cut into the granite, lit by a single torch in a wall bracket at the bottom. The key fit the lock. The door opened onto a circular room perhaps 20 feet across, the walls lined floor to ceiling with iron-banded chests, bound scrolls in individual stone niches, and a single reading table in the center with an oil lamp already burning low. Already burning. I stopped in the doorway. Someone had been here recently. I stepped inside. The room smelled of old parchment and something else, something mineral and sharp, like struck flint. My wolf stirred uneasily. I moved to the nearest set of scroll niches and began to read labels. Treaty of the First Binding. 3:12 a.m. Blood Compact, Iron Fang and Gray Spine. 289 a.m. I stopped. Gray Spine. The Gray Spine was one of the 3 packs in the coalition moving against the Iron Fang. I pulled that scroll. It was old, the parchment brown and crackling at the edges, the ink faded but legible. A formal treaty of mutual defense between 2 packs, signed 3 centuries ago. Standard enough. Except for the addendum at the bottom. Written in newer ink. Much newer. I brought the scroll to the lamp. The addendum was 3 lines. In the event of a dissolution of the Iron Fang Alpha bloodline, the terms of the blood compact are held to supersede subsequent succession claims. The Gray Spine retains right of first challenge. Right of first challenge. If Selim was deposed, if the bloodline was dissolved, the Gray Spine had a centuries-old legal claim to the territory that would supersede any other challenge. Which meant the coalition wasn't just moving for dominance. They were moving to invoke an ancient treaty. One that was already legal under pack law. I set the scroll down. My hands were not entirely steady. This was bigger than a traitor feeding patrol routes to an outside enemy. This was a legal mechanism. A 3-century-old contract that someone had found, dusted off, and added a new clause to. In newer ink. I looked at the addendum again. The handwriting was precise. Administrative. Practiced. I had spent 8 hours in the council archive reading correspondence. I knew that handwriting. I knew it. I was on the stairs when I heard the voice. You went to the vault. I stopped. Selim was standing at the top of the stairs. Not angry. Not cold. Something else. Something that looked, in the torchlight, like a man who had been waiting to see what I would do and was not entirely surprised by the result. You knew I would, I said. I gave you a master key, he said. Yes. I knew. I climbed the last few steps and stood in front of him. The blood compact, I said. The Grey Spine Treaty. The addendum. His face confirmed it, a slight tightening, a muscle jumping in his jaw. You've seen it, he said. The addendum was added recently, I said. The ink. I know. Selim. The handwriting. I know, he said again. Quieter. Do you? I looked at him. Because if you know whose handwriting that is, then you know who the traitor is. And you know who found that treaty and weaponized it. And you know that in the time it's taken you to manage this situation, to reject me publicly and lock me in your hall and protect me from a threat, I stopped. Breathed. In all that time, that person has been inside your walls. With access to your counsel. Your records. Your plans. He looked at me. Those silver eyes. Elder Finn, I said. He closed his eyes for a single second. Elder Finn, he confirmed. The torch between us flickered. He was the treaty librarian before he was a council advisor, Selim said. He knew the archives better than anyone in the Pack's history. He knew exactly what was in the lower vault. He knew the blood compact existed. He turned away from me slightly, looking at the far wall of the war room. He has been with this Pack for 40 years. He served my father. He helped me take the seat. And he's been helping someone else take it back, I said. He believes Selim stopped. His jaw worked. He believes the Kren succession should have stood. He was the one who presented my father's named succession document in the first place. He considered it a personal betrayal when the blood claim superseded it. 40 years, I said. Yes. He has waited 40 years for this. Yes. The weight of that settled into the room. I watched Selim stand with it, the specific weight of betrayal by someone trusted, someone close, someone whose loyalty had been assumed so deeply it had become invisible. That kind of betrayal didn't land cleanly. It landed like a stone in deep water, sending circles outward through everything else. He knows I've been looking, I said. Selim's eyes snapped to mine. What? He knew I was in the archive today. If he's been watching the hall's movements, and he has, that's how he's been feeding information to the coalition, he knows I've been in the records room. He may not know exactly what I found. But he knows I was looking. I held his gaze. How long before he warns them? Selim moved. Not the considered, deliberate movement of an alpha managing a situation. The fast, decisive movement of a wolf who has just understood the timeline has changed. Draven, he said, already at the war room door. And then he turned back to me. Just for one moment. Stay here, he said. Selim. Please. The word came out rough. Like it cost him something. Please, Seraphine. Stay here. I looked at him. At the urgency in his face, the controlled fear underneath the command, not fear for himself, I realized. Fear for me. Go, I said. I'll stay. He held my gaze for one more second. Then he was gone, and I could hear him moving through the hall with speed, Draven's voice rising to meet him in the corridor, and the thunder of boots on stone as something that had been building for months finally broke open. I sat down at the war table. And I waited. The traitor has a name now. The vault has given up its secret. And Selim has run toward the danger while leaving Seraphine behind. This time, she chose to stay. But Elder Finn has 40 years of patience and a head start. Chapter 10, The Trap Springs. I lasted 11 minutes. I counted them against the rhythm of the rain, still driving hard against the hall's outer walls, each minute marked by a breath and a resolution that crumbled slightly at its edges the longer I sat. Stay here, he had said. Please. And I had meant it when I said I would. But 11 minutes of sitting at the war table in a room that smelled of old maps and iron while somewhere in the hall a 40-year conspiracy was either being caught or escaping, 11 minutes was the precise limit of my capacity for stillness. I got up. I was not going to do anything reckless. I was going to find out what was happening. There is a difference. The corridor outside the war room was empty, everyone had moved, responding to whatever signal Selim had sent through the hall. I could hear activity somewhere in the direction of the main entrance. Raised voices. The clank of armor. I went the other direction. The east corridor. The one that led to the council chambers, where Elder Finn would have kept his personal offices, his private records, his 40 years of accumulated influence arranged neatly on shelves. If he was running. If he had already sent word to the coalition and was extracting himself before Selim reached him. His office would be the last place he'd pass through. He was 70 years old. A scholar, not a soldier. He would not go over the walls. He would walk out through the council passage, the secondary exit the senior advisors used to move between the hall and the outer village without crossing the main courtyard. The passage that came out behind the grain stores. The same path I had used 3 days ago to avoid Draven. I moved fast. The east corridor was dim, with fewer torches at this hour, the storm making everything outside the windows black and featureless. I kept close to the wall, stepping carefully to minimize sound on the stone floor, and when I reached the turning that led to the council chambers I slowed. Listened. A door. Moving. The soft, deliberate sound of someone trying very hard not to make noise. I pressed back against the wall and waited. Elder Finn came around the corner 40 seconds later. He was dressed for travel, a heavy cloak, boots that laced to the knee, a leather satchel over one shoulder that was clearly weighted with documents. He moved with focused speed, that slightly hunched forward posture of an old man who had decided urgency mattered more than dignity. He was past me before he registered I was there. He stopped. Turned. We looked at each other in the torchlight. His face, lined and weathered, the face I had seen at council tables and harvest ceremonies for my entire life, went through several things in rapid succession. Surprise. Calculation. Then something that settled into a kind of resigned composure. Seraphine Ashvale, he said. Elder Finn, I said. We stood 6 feet apart in the dim corridor while the storm raged outside and the sounds of the hall's mobilization echoed from somewhere distant and muffled. The Alpha is looking for you, I said. I know, he said. In the main entrance area. I kept my voice neutral. He sent Draven and the senior warriors toward the main gate. I don't think he considered the council passage. Something moved in the old wolf's eyes. Not cruelty. Not the flat effect of a committed villain. Something more painful than that. You found the vault, he said. Yes. The addendum. Yes. He looked at me for a moment. You are cleverer than I expected, he said. Not unkindly. I had not anticipated the Alpha giving you access to the archives. He didn't anticipate giving it to me either, I said. Not consciously. A faint, complicated expression crossed his face. He trusts you, he said. Despite everything. Despite the performance at the ceremony. He studied me. Or perhaps because of it. Because he had to do something terrible to protect you and it changed something. I said nothing. I did not intend for you to be hurt, he said. But you told the coalition about the bond. I told them about the bond, yes. He held my gaze. I did not tell them to target you. I did not, that was never part of my design. My quarrel is with the succession. Not with you. Your quarrel is with a 6-year-old decision, I said. And you're willing to burn the entire pack down to settle it. Not burn, he said. Quietly. With the patience of a man who had spent decades believing something. Correct. The Kren succession was legal. Documented. It was my life's most significant act of counsel, helping the old Alpha ensure continuity in a bloodline that was failing. And then, his jaw tightened. The blood claim. A technicality of ancient law invoked by a boy who was barely of age, who had never served the pack, never led a single patrol. He has led this pack for 6 years, I said. He has, Finn acknowledged. Better than I expected, honestly. A pause. But the principle stands. What was taken from the Krens was Draven. The voice came from behind me. I had not heard him coming. I had been focused entirely on Finn and had let the corridor at my back go unmonitored. A mistake. A basic, fundamental mistake of the kind I would not normally make. Draven stood 10 feet behind me with 2 warriors flanking him. Elder Finn looked at the 3 wolves. Then at me. Something shifted in his expression, a brief, complicated thing that might have been respect. You weren't looking for information, he said to me. No, I said. You were keeping me here. Yes. I had been loud enough on purpose. Taken long enough on purpose. Held his attention on his own justifications, the most reliable way to hold any person's attention, until the sounds of the hall's mobilization grew close enough that I could hear Draven's footsteps behind me. 11 minutes of sitting still. And then exactly the right kind of reckless. Draven moved past me. He stopped in front of Elder Finn. Elder Finn, he said. His voice was perfectly level. The Alpha requests your presence in the hall. The old wolf looked at him. At his packed satchel. At the warriors behind Draven. Then his shoulders dropped, a small, final movement, like a weight being set down. Of course, he said. Selim found me in the corridor 5 minutes later. He came fast, taking the turn from the main passage at a pace that said he'd been moving through the hall with urgency, and when he saw me he stopped. His chest was moving faster than usual. His hair was disordered from the speed of his movement. He looked at me, a long, sweeping assessment from the top of my head to my feet, reading for injury, for distress, for anything wrong, and then his expression did something I hadn't seen from him yet. It broke open. Just slightly. Just at the edges. You stayed, he said. And then immediately, you did not stay. Draven has him, I said. He stared at me. I didn't do anything dangerous, I said. I found him in the east corridor and talked to him until your people got there. You confronted the man who has been feeding intelligence to a hostile coalition, alone, in a dim corridor. I talked to him, I said. There is a difference. Seraphine. He is not a violent man, I said. He is an old wolf with a 40-year grievance and a legal strategy. He was not going to hurt me. I paused. I was fairly confident of that. Fairly, Selim repeated. reasonably confident. He closed his eyes for a single moment. When he opened them, the expression there was something I needed to look at directly and carefully to understand, because it was layered, and the layers were all significant. Relief. Fury. Something underneath both of those that had no clean name. You could have been harmed, he said. But I wasn't. That is not, he stopped. Pressed his fingers to his brow. That is not the reassuring statement you appear to think it is. It's an accurate one. He looked at me. I looked back. And something cracked between us, not broke, not shattered, but cracked in the specific way of ice in early spring, the first fissure that signals the whole surface is about to shift. Come here, he said. Very quietly. I did not move. He crossed the distance instead. He stopped directly in front of me, closer than he had stood in the records room, closer than the war table, closer than any of the carefully maintained distances of the last several days. Close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact, and his scent was all around me, and the bond in my chest was not tugging or aching or sitting crooked. It was pulling. Steady and strong and certain, the way a compass needle found north. He raised one hand. Slowly. And pressed his palm to the side of my face. His hand was warm. Rough with callus. His thumb rested just below my cheekbone, and he held my face with a gentleness that was wholly at odds with the iron-jawed, blade-eyed alpha who had spoken 4 words in a sacred circle and shattered 300 people's understanding of what came next. I held very still. I am sorry, he said. 2 words. Carrying more weight than I knew how to receive. For the ceremony, he said. For the locking of the door. For every decision I made about your life without asking. His thumb moved, the smallest motion, barely anything. I am sorry. The corridor was very quiet. Rain on stone. Distant torchlight. Selim, I said. Yes. The door to my room, I said. You unlocked it. Yes. You gave me a master key. Yes. You let me find the vault. Yes. You gave me exactly enough information to follow the trail myself, and then you stepped back and let me follow it. I searched his face. You have been letting me act since the morning I told you I wouldn't sit down. Something moved in his expression. I have been, he said carefully. Why? His thumb moved again, barely. Because you are not someone who should be managed, he said. You are someone who should be, he paused, as if testing the word before he used it. Partnered. The word landed in the center of my chest. Right where the bond lived. And the bond, for the first time since the ceremony, for the first time since it had been wrenched sideways by a public performance neither of us had wanted, went fully quiet. Not the held breath quiet of tension. The quiet of something at rest. Something home. Chapter 11, The Reckoning. The storm broke at dawn. I was there to see it, standing at the window of the East Wing room with a fur around my shoulders and a cup of something hot that Petra had brought without being asked, watching the clouds part and the first pale light come through. The pack was gathered in the main courtyard an hour later. Selim had called the assembly at first light. Not in the sacred circle, not with ceremony drums and torches and white linen. Just the courtyard, gray morning sky overhead, the pack arranged in the concentric rings of rank and standing that formed naturally when wolves gathered around their alpha. I stood at the back. I was not hiding. But I was not placing myself at the front either. That was not my position, not publicly, not yet. There were steps that came before the standing openly at the alpha side, and those steps had not been taken. Elder Finn stood at the center of the courtyard, before Selim. He was not bound. Not physically restrained. That was a deliberate choice, I suspected, a choice that said something about how Selim intended this reckoning to be conducted. Not punishment. Accounting. Selim stood before him in full ceremonial armor, the black leather, the hammered iron circlet, the full weight of the Alpha's authority arranged around him like weather. His face was composed. His voice, when he spoke, carried to the edges of the courtyard without apparent effort. "Elder Finn," he said. "You served my father for 20 years. You served me for 6. In that time you were given access to the inner records, the council seal, and the trust of this pack's leadership." He paused. "I am told you used that access to locate a 3-century-old treaty and add language to it that did not previously exist." Finn stood straight. He had slept in the hall's holding room, but he was composed. Dignified. He did not look like a man who had been caught. He looked like a man who had made his decision long ago and had been waiting for this moment. "I did," he said. The crowd was very still. "I am told you passed intelligence to the Blood Hollow and the Grey Spine Coalition, patrol schedules, territorial information, and information about the Alpha's personal bond status." "I did," Finn said again. Murmuring through the pack. A low, troubled sound. "Tell me why," Selim said. It was not a legal prompt. It was a genuine question. Finn looked at him. "Because this pack deserved better than a technicality," he said. "Marin Kren served your father for 30 years. He built the trade routes that feed these people. He negotiated the eastern border settlement that has kept this territory safe for 2 decades. He was chosen. Prepared. Ready." A pause. "And then you arrived, young, untested, and a blood claim that should have been irrelevant superseded everything he had given his life to." "My father's blood claim was not a technicality," Selim said. "It was law." "Law can be unjust," Finn said. "Yes," Selim said. "It can. But the answer to unjust law is not treason." He held the old wolf's gaze. "It is petition. Counsel. Challenge through legitimate means. A beat. You had 6 years. You could have brought this to me directly." Something in Finn's composure shifted. Almost imperceptibly. "Would you have listened?" he said. Silence. Selim looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know," he said finally. "I would like to think I would have." He paused. "I suppose we'll never know." The honest answer. The same quality of honesty he'd shown me in the hall on the first night. "I don't know." It moved through the watching pack differently than certainty would have. Not weakness, something more like gravity. Something that acknowledged the weight of real things. "The wolves of the coalition who were promised an opening," Selim continued. "They will not get it. The addendum is nullified, the original treaty stands. Our border defenses have been realigned based on the patrol information you passed." He looked at Finn steadily. "The threat they were building toward has been closed." Finn received this without visible reaction. "You are expelled from the Iron Fang," Selim said. "Your council seal is revoked. Your right to return is conditional on a period of exile to be determined by the council." He paused. "You will be given safe passage to the border, food for travel, and your personal possessions." Another pause. "Because you are old. And because whatever you believed it genuinely. And because I am choosing to be something other than the man you assumed I was." Finn looked at him. Something moved across the old wolf's face. Not gratitude exactly. But something adjacent to respect. "Marin Kren had no involvement in this," Finn said. "I want that stated. He knew nothing of my actions. Neither did his daughter." A murmur through the pack. Selim nodded once. Noted, he said. And recorded. Beta Kren came forward when Finn was escorted away. He was a large man, gray-haired and broad-shouldered, the weight of middle age settled into him like iron ballast. His face was difficult to read, the practiced neutrality of a man who had spent decades managing his own expressions. He stood before Selim. Alpha, he said. Beta Kren, Selim said. They looked at each other. The whole pack waited. I didn't know, Kren said. Not defensive. Not pleading. Just clear. I believe you, Selim said. Kren was quiet for a moment. If I had known what was being done in the name of my succession, he stopped. His jaw tightened. That was not what I wanted. It was never what I wanted. I know, Selim said. The seat was yours, Kren said. It should have been yours. I told Marin that when your blood claim was presented, and I'll say it again in front of every wolf in this pack. He paused. I stepped aside because it was right. Not because I was forced. Selim was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped forward. Extended his hand. Kren looked at it. Then he took it. The grip held for a long moment between them, two wolves, two claims, for decades of complicated history, and when it broke the crowd exhaled. I exhaled. I was still standing at the back of the crowd when the assembly began to disperse. Wolves moved around me in the slow, processing way of people who have witnessed something significant, talking quietly, some shaking their heads, some simply moving with the introspective silence of those who needed to think. I stayed still. Watching Selim in the center of the courtyard, speaking in low tones with Draven, his hand moving once across the back of his neck in a gesture I had not seen before, something private, something human. He looked tired. Not physically, there was no exhaustion in the set of his body, the Alpha's training too deeply ingrained for that. But something around his eyes and his mouth. The tiredness of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just set part of it down. As if he felt my gaze, he looked up. Across the disbanding crowd, across the courtyard, across the gray morning air still damp with last night's rain. His eyes found mine. And he did not look away. Draven said something. Selim held up a hand without breaking eye contact with me, a brief, automatic gesture that meant wait. He walked toward me. The crowd thinned around us until we were standing in a pocket of relative space, the nearest wolves giving distance with the unconscious deference of pack instinct. He stopped in front of me. You could have been anywhere this morning, he said. I was here, I said. You could have run, he said. Last night, with the hall mobilized and Draven occupied, you had a window. I had thought about it. That was honest. I had stood at the unlocked door of the East Wing room sometime around midnight and I had thought about it clearly and deliberately. I had things to finish, I said. The traitor was caught, he said. That was finished. Not that, I said. He looked at me. What then? I looked back at him, at this complicated, infuriating, armor-plated, secretly careful man who had shattered me in a sacred circle to protect me and then handed me the key to his entire archive and watched to see what I would do with it. You, I said. Quietly. Clearly. Without flinching. I had unfinished things with you. Something cracked open in his face. Wide enough, this time, to see all the way through. Chapter 12, The Real Claiming. He walked me to the sacred circle that evening. Not with ceremony drums. Not with the pack assembled. Just the two of us, and the moon, full and enormous and white silver above the tree-line, pouring clean light across the stone ring and the cold grass and the remains of the torches that had burned 3 nights ago when the world broke. The circle looked different by moonlight. Less formal. Less like a stage. More like what it had always been, underneath the ceremony. A clearing. A sacred ground. A place where the goddess witnessed things. I stood at the threshold. Selim stood beside me. I want to do this differently, he said. Yes, I said. No audience. He looked at the circle. No performance. No protection strategy. He paused. Just the actual thing. He turned to face me. In the moonlight, without the armor, without the circlet, wearing dark wool and his own expression unguarded for the first time since I had known him, he looked less like the alpha of the Iron Fang and more like the man underneath it. Powerful, yes. That didn't leave him. But also something else. Something that looked uncertain. In the way of someone who is doing something important and knows it and cannot predict the outcome. I handled every part of this wrong, he said. From the moment the bond formed, I handled it according to strategy instead of, he stopped. Instead of what was true. What was true? I asked. He held my gaze. That I was afraid, he said. Not of the coalition. Not of the traitor. A pause. I have faced threats to this pack before. I have faced challenges and border conflicts and famines and every other disaster that comes with the seat. I have never been, he exhaled. I have never been afraid the way the bond made me afraid. Why? Because it mattered, he said simply. You mattered. And everything that matters is something you can lose. The words landed in the quiet between us. The goddess moon poured down around us, silver and absolute. So you rejected me, I said. Gently this time. Not as an accusation. So I rejected you, he said. And the moment I did, the moment I watched you fall, I understood the full magnitude of my own stupidity. Something crossed his face. Fear of loss does not prevent loss. It only prevents living. I looked at him. That's a significant thing to learn, I said. You have a talent for making me learn things, he said. Rapidly. Against my will. I found your traitor, I said. You found my traitor, he confirmed. I also refused 3 direct alpha commands. You refused all of them. I solved your record-keeping problem. You solved my record-keeping problem, my security breach, and my archival corruption issue. He paused. In 2 days. And I stayed, I said. When I didn't have to. He was very still. Yes, he said. You stayed. I need you to understand that, I said. Not that I was unable to leave. Not that you imprisoned me effectively. But that I chose to stay. I held his gaze. That is the only version of this that I can be part of. I am not something to be managed or protected without consultation or decided about. I am the other half of this bond. Which means I am your equal in it. Which means every decision, every single one, we make together. He listened. All of it. Without interrupting, without invoking authority, without the alpha's instinct to control the terms of a conversation. And when I finished, he said, yes. One word. Absolute as the stone walls of his hall. But different from no. Everything different. I searched his face. Selim, I said. Seraphine, he said. My name in his voice. Not as a command. Not as a dismissal. Like something he had been holding carefully for a long time, waiting to be allowed to put down. He stepped forward. 1 step. And I stepped forward. 1 step. And the bond between us, the one he had called a performance and I had called crooked, the one that had survived a public severing and 3 days of locked doors and a traitor's interference and the worst possible beginning. Completed. Not snapped into place. Not clicked or cracked or jolted. Simply settled. Like the last piece of a long winter finally giving way to something warmer. Like breathing in after holding too long. His hand came to my face again. Both hands this time, cradling my face with that calloused, careful warmth. And in the sacred circle, under the goddess moon, with no audience and no drums and no white linen and no performance. He said my name again. Just my name. And everything in me that had been holding itself rigid against grief and fury and bewilderment and hope. Let go. I reached up. My hands found the front of his shirt. And I pulled him down to me. The kiss was not what I expected. I had expected urgency, the breaking of a dam, pressure and heat and the rushed relief of something long denied. Instead it was slow. Deliberate. The way he did everything that mattered. His mouth on mine, his hands steady against my face, the moon pouring down around us like witness and benediction, and the bond between us warm and settled and finally, at last, entirely real. When we broke apart, my forehead rested against his jaw. His breath was unsteady. So was mine. I'm not forgiving you immediately, I said into the silence. A breath escaped him. The almost laugh I had heard once before. I know, he said. This is going to require significant reparation. I expected nothing less. I am going to be extremely difficult about the council archive access. You may have permanent access to the council archive. And the lower vault. A pause. And the lower vault, he agreed. And I am not going to simply accept alpha commands. I have noticed, he said drily. With regularity. I pulled back enough to look at him. His face in the moonlight, open, unguarded, carrying all the complicated weight of a man who had learned something important the hardest possible way. Partner, I said. He held my gaze. Partner, he said back. And meant it. Epilogue, what comes after? Spring came slowly to the Iron Fong territory. It always did. The mountain range held the cold longer than the valleys to the south, and the last snow didn't leave the upper passes until well into the warming season, leaving the Pack's territory in a long, gray half-thaw that smelled of mud and pine melt and the first cautious green things pushing up through frozen ground. But it came. It always came. The Coalition's challenge, when it arrived formally 2 months after Elder Finn's expulsion, was presented through official channels, a written declaration carried by neutral messengers, as Pack law required. Selim answered it through official channels. With documentation. The amended Blood Compact, nullified. The original treaty, reinstated. Evidence of correspondence fraud, the addendum, analyzed and attributed. A formal accounting of the intelligence breach and its closure. The Blood Hollows Alpha, a hard, ambitious wolf named Rector, had built his challenge on the legal foundation Finn had constructed for him. When that foundation was methodically dismantled and the evidence presented to the Neutral Council of Territories, the challenge collapsed before a single warrior was deployed. It was not the ending anyone had anticipated. It was better. Beta Kren formally renewed his oath at the spring gathering. He stood in the courtyard with his daughter at his side and spoke the words of fealty with the particular straightness of a man who wanted no ambiguity about his position. Isolde was at his side. She caught my eye across the courtyard. I gave her a small nod. She returned it. We were not friends. Not yet. Perhaps not ever, in the way that word implied ease in history. But we were something. Two wolves who had circled each other's edges and chosen, in the end, to pull back rather than bite. That was enough to build on. Elder Finn sent a letter from his exile, a northern settlement 2 territories east, where he had been permitted to reside under the watchful eye of a neutral pack. Selim read it at the writing desk in the early morning while I braided my hair at the copper mirror. We had moved from the East Wing into the Alpha's own chambers 2 weeks after the Sacred Circle. I had not been moved there immediately. There had been steps. Conversations. Decisions made together, with the particular careful deliberateness of 2 people who had both been through something significant and were not going to rush the aftermath. But I was there now. And the door was always unlocked. "What does he say?" I asked. Selim set the letter down. That he was wrong about the method, he said. Not about what he believed, but about the method. "That's honest," I said. "It is," he agreed. I looked at him in the mirror, his reflection, seated at the desk with the morning light coming through the window and the letter in his hand, and the specific gravity of a man who was sitting with a complicated thing and not trying to make it simple. "Will you write back?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "When I know what to say." I nodded. Finished the braid. Set down the comb. Turned to face him. "Council meeting at mid-morning," I said. "I know." He looked up. "You reviewed the water rights petition?" "Last night." "I have notes." "Of course you do." The corner of his mouth moved. "The Eastern Boundary Survey also needs updating. The markers Finn's records show don't match what Draven's patrols are finding." I crossed toward the door. "I'll pull the relevant scrolls before the meeting." "Seraphine." I paused. He was looking at me with those silver eyes, blade edge and steady, the Alpha's gaze. But underneath that, something warm. Something I had learned to read in the past 2 months, the specific warmth that was only ever directed at me and that he had, very gradually, stopped trying to conceal. "Thank you," he said. I looked at him. "For what specifically?" I asked. "For staying," he said. "Not for the traitor. Not for the archive. Not for the coalition's collapse challenge. For staying." I held his gaze for a moment. "I was going to leave," I reminded him. "You gave me an unlocked door and a master key and let me find my own reasons to stay." "Yes," he said. "That was very calculated of you." "It was," he agreed without apology. I looked at him a moment longer. Then the corner of my mouth moved. "Adequate strategy," I said. I went to find the boundary scrolls. His almost laugh followed me down the corridor. That night, when the council meeting had finished and the hall was quiet and the last of the torches were burning low, I stood again at a window. Not the East Wing window. A different one. Higher. Looking out over the courtyard and the outer village and beyond it the forest, dark and dense and ancient, rising toward the mountain range that held the cold long into spring. This land. This complicated, difficult, beautiful land and the complicated, difficult, beautiful pack that lived within it. I had not chosen this. Not the bond. Not the rejection. Not the locked door or the traitor or any of the wreckage that had come before the thing that came after. None of it had been my choice. But staying. Staying had been. And what had been built in the staying, the partnership and the trust and the careful, deliberate construction of something real from the ruins of something performed. That was mine. That was ours. I felt him before I heard him. The shift in the room's air. The deep forest scent, the rain-wet stone. He came to stand beside me at the window. We stood in the dark together and looked out at the land. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That spring takes a long time here," I said. "It does. But it comes. It always comes," he said. His hand found mine in the dark. And I let it.